Welcome to the Youth Ministry in Motion podcast, the show designed to keep youth workers motivated and youth ministries moving forward. Now, here's your host, blogger, speaker, and lover of nerd stuff, Paul Turner.
All right. Hey, everybody. Welcome into the Youth Ministry in Motion podcast, the podcast that keeps you motivated and your youth ministry moving forward. A special guest with us today. This is actually, you're going to hear probably another podcast where it's probably going to be the fact that I announced that somebody else was a guest. I have an interview in the can, and I said they were going to be my first interview, and technically they are, Jared. I just want to put this out there. But you may be the first published guest. So they were my first guests that I did that. But with me today, for those that are listening, is Jared Elrod. He is a blogger and YouTuber and social media fanatic. And you can catch him over at youthfactor.us or US, whichever way you choose to say that. And so if you're joining us for the first time, hey, we have a lot to cover today, and we're going to get into it. So you could be watching this, or you could be listening to this, because this will probably make it to one or both of our YouTube channels. So be aware of that we're talking both in audio and video, however you choose to, think about that. You can listen visually, or you can visually listen, whichever you choose to do. But anyway, Jared, welcome to the podcast, buddy.
Hey, thanks for having me. Glad to be here.
And Jared and I met. How did we meet? Did we meet on Twitter? Is that how we connected?
Yeah, I tried to Gary V you, and then you out Gary V'd me back. So
that's true.
Instant connection.
That's true. Yeah, it's true. Both of us are Gary V fans, and if you're not familiar with who Gary Vaynerchuk is, he is a social media guy, CEO of VaynerMedia, and we like a lot of his business stuff. Not a big fan of potty mouth, but we are a fan of the business principles. That's just how he rolls. Isn't that right?
Is correct.
That's how he rolls. So, I'm not going to hate him. I know some youth pastors that got potty mouth, so shame on them. They're mostly, well, I won't say that. I was going to call somebody out. I was going to call a group of people out. I thought, no, I better not do that. That's not going to work very well. So today is the 10-year anniversary as listening to this. And probably when you listen to this, it may be, it's just about a week old maybe or so. But anyway, let me just share a few of these, Jared, that and maybe we can go back and forth and read a few here. These are tweets that were tweeted 10 years ago. Now, I don't know about you, but I'm close to 10,000 tweets. I should have made it a goal to hit like 10,000 on this day, but I wasn't smart enough or quick enough to do that. I think I'm like 500 tweets short. I don't know what I would tweet. I could get on there now and like go crazy and like lose all my followers, and that would be awesome. So what is Paul doing? He's lost his mind. He's just talking random junk. And so I thought we'd just go back and forth here. These are tweets. It's from BuzzFeed, and this will be in the show notes, by the way. And this is brought to you, by the way, by the Fresh Impact newsletter. But if you're not signed up for that, by the way, you can go to thediscipleproject.net, sign up for that, get all the links and extra stuff that I include in that for the podcast, some podcast notes, as well as some little fill it out forms and that kind of stuff that you can use for your ministry and your own personal edification. But today, for those of you that are listening, we appreciate you listening, being a part of the Youth Ministry in Motion podcast. And today we're getting into a topic that Jared brought up, is taking our calling seriously. And this is what we call the meat of the podcast, if you will. And so, Jared, tell us a little bit about how the topic got up. Was it the fact that you were talking to slacker youth pastors? Is that how it came up? You're talking to a bunch of slacker youth pastors and said, this is a problem.
Yeah, exactly. No, actually, it kind of started when I had been out of youth ministry for a few years. I thought I was going to be done. I'd been running my business, doing freelance work and whatnot. And when I got back into youth ministry, I was like really interested. I'm like, how's this going to work? Because like I remember how I was as a youth pastor, and I know how I am now as like a business guy. What's that going to look like when I take like who I am now and go back into youth ministry? And so I was just really interested in that. And I just noticed I was a lot more focused. I was a lot more, I kind of had this attitude of like, okay, I've spent the last like 3 years trying to sell words as, copywriting marketer, trying to sell other people's stuff, knowing of other people who would just sell like the line I used is t-shirts on Teespring, and putting in 14-hour days to get these this t-shirt empire. I actually had a friend who went from like nothing, I'm gonna say friend, acquaintance, from nothing to like a multi-million-dollar business selling t-shirts on Teespring.
Wow.
And so then I got back into youth ministry, and I was all fired up. I'm like, yeah, and I get in, and I'm expecting to be like, not like the young guy, but I'm just expecting like, okay, I got to get back in. I got to relearn a bunch of this stuff. I got to catch up culturally with the youth and all this kind of thing. So I start jumping into Facebook groups, particularly, and start jumping in conversations. And all of a sudden I realized like there was a big difference between like the way my business friends hustled or talked, and then like the way like the youth pastors were talking. And like my business friends and all the groups I was in, everything, not everything was like so serious, but like they had passion. And some of their businesses, even though they're my friends, in my opinion, were just dumb, or things that didn't matter. Like I have a good buddy who sells animations, and he's an awesome guy, and the animations are amazing that he does. But like 100 years from now, they're not going to be around. It's not like Walt Disney. And so just to see the different like passion, and then I get into youth pastor groups and just to see some of the conversations, and it kind of bummed me out. And I was kind of thinking like, oh man, like where's the difference here? And so then I started reading. So I was thinking like, well, maybe it's just different in youth ministry. And I remember thinking back to myself, and I was like, I was kind of a slacker. Like I remember the thing that was on my mind the most as a youth pastor is like my family time, quote unquote, which was really my Netflix time. I was in the room with my family, but I was watching a show or surfing the internet. And so anytime there was something like a graduation, a football game, something my pastor would be like, oh, you should go to this. I resented it because I was like, you know what? I'm off the clock. I'm home. You're interfering. Like, it goes God, family, then ministry, and you're interfering with that. And that really like bothered me then. And then now I'm looking back to like, I was an idiot. Like, no wonder like I wasn't having the results I was looking for. I was all worried about getting off at 4:00 and going home. And so, yeah, that got me thinking. And then I started listening to, I'll wrap this up, a biography on D.L. Moody. And then he mentioned a couple other guys in there, George Mueller, and then Spurgeon, and they different quotes, and they all had the same attitude of like, hey, what we're doing as ministers is super serious. I mean, Moody started out in kids ministry, and he, and like youth pastors, at least when I grew up, like love to make fun of kids pastors. But here's a kids pastor who
would like, not make fun of D.L. Moody.
No,
don't
exactly. And this whole concept of like how serious in terms of, again, not neglecting their families, not any of these things, not ending their lives well, not having moral failures because of burnout or all these things. I was told I was told by pastors and youth pastors recently, like I'm gonna have an affair and cheat on my wife because I'm working too much, and bro, you need to relax, and please promise me you're gonna stop working as hard, and all these comments I had heard. I actually got attacked on a couple articles I wrote.
Really?
Like, yeah. And so you wonder why I get all fired up about this. Like some of the dumb things I got comments on, and I'm like, and the thing that I kept coming to is the fact of like, it bothers me that my old set of friends, I shouldn't say old because I'm still friends with them, but like they're working so hard to sell like, things. Steve Jobs made that comment about like sugar water. So like in my mind, it's like, the whole Teespring shirt, the whole sugar water idea.
Right.
They're working so hard to do that. And then like my comrades in ministry are chatting about their favorite video games and this and that. Again, not to say that any of that stuff, is necessarily inherently bad, but just to see that was the focus. And I was like, why? Like, where? Like, shouldn't we be more passionate as we have a more important mission, and we have people's like lives and souls in that we're in the balance of. And it was really refreshing for me to go back 100 years and listen to these guys, and because I was thinking like, well, God, maybe am I in error? Like, am I, entrepreneurs are kind of known for not having balance, and sometimes having issues and burning out and having relationship problems. So is it me? Like, am I actually? And then luckily he kind of guided me towards these three men, first with D.L. Moody, and then these other two through it. And I'm kind of reading their stuff still, going through it. And I was refreshed because I'm like, okay, so no, I think obviously there's been, people in the past who had similar, and they were able to walk that line and not not like the one counselor pastor
Yeah.
who told me like I have a moral failure because I'm working too many hours. So yeah. Anyways, that's kind of what got me on this topic and came up on it because of some of the conversations I saw and some of the blowback I was getting for some of the things I was saying.
Well, and the blowback you got was simply about just basically to lay low and to just chill out and just kind of like
Yeah.
don't worry about stuff.
Yeah, and the general consensus was about 35 to 40 hours a week is all you should be working as a youth pastor. Anything more than that, and you're kind of in error. And not said, but I was kind of getting the hint of like rocking the boat.
Right.
And so it was like they were all, and they were like, oh, you know what? If it's a big thing, like if you have summer, if you have camp or something like that, it's okay to hit 50. And I was like, if you have camp, you're hitting 50 in like in a couple days. Like, how are you not? I don't know. I kind of got really annoyed, and then I'm looking at these other posts where they're talking about their sermon prep and how they'll spend like 6 hours to 8 hours to 10 or 12 hours, and I'm like, I'm trying to do the math here. I'm like, I was never great at math, but I'm like, okay, so if you're spending upwards of 12 hours a week, like not like time with the Lord, but like just doing all your sermon stuff, getting your notes, getting your PowerPoints, getting all your stuff together. If you're spending anywhere from 6 to 12 hours doing that, and you're only working, that's a week, and you're only working 35 hours a week,
Yeah.
you're not talking to students, because I've seen tons of that, talking about how, no, we have our small group leaders talk to students. I'm like, what are you doing?
Well, let me ask you this then, because the times, I was thinking about this the other day, how I spend my time and how I do things. It is much easier today, whereas you had to either spend a number of hours or however long you spent working on mailing lists, right?
Mm-hmm.
You would do mailing lists to contact students. You'd physically write out postcards, or you would do birthday cards, or you would do whatever. And today, rather than in doing that, I just got on this new app called Musical.ly, and got on there and found the Beatles, the birthday song. Today's your birthday. It's my birthday too, and so I did a little lip sync with that and sent it and put it on and included the girl in it, and so it was me singing the Beatles Happy Birthday, and that took all of about like a minute or two. And so what would you say then to guys who say, well, you know what, we don't have to work as hard? And I don't know if it's about necessarily work. Is it, maybe I'll just ask you, is it, as far as taking your calling seriously, is it about the amount of hours put in, or is it about the amount of effort put into the hours you do spend in what you're doing?
Yeah, I think it's both. I mean, because you obviously can't just be sitting around the office, not doing anything or not being effective, because that doesn't really do any good. And I was totally guilty of that in the past. I would spend just time, because I had office hours, and I was still, like a really young youth pastor, and I had older, like senior pastors who were very watching. So I was like, I got to be behind my desk. I have to be putting in the hours, and I was doing dumb stuff that was like not really contributing that much to the ministry, where I could have been doing other things. So that's one aspect. Like, you can't just sit behind a desk for 8 hours a day and think that you're gonna, something's gonna matter. Like, God's gonna honor the fact that your butt's in the seat. That's not gonna happen.
Right? That's the old school thinking of office hours.
Yes.
That if you spend 8 hours there, and at the end of your career you get a gold watch if you put all your hours in, and you retire and everybody celebrates and that kind of stuff. Well, that era, yes, Mad Men era, if I will, is over. So then, what then does taking your calling seriously as far as that looks? What does that look like to you? Describe to me the person who takes their calling seriously, that are in youth ministry positions, that regardless of how many hours, because obviously there's volunteers, right? There's volunteers who don't get paid to do it. There are bivocational who have an extra job and what they do in the youth ministry. Then there's the full-time guys. So are we targeting the full-time guys that are not using their time effectively, or how can we describe what serious calling is spread out amongst those three dynamics?
Yeah, that's tough to say without actually knowing the person. And, I personally believe that there's a difference between like a youth pastor called into his ministry and the person who's filling in because, they're the youth leader who's like there running it.
Right.
Maybe, because there's no one else. And even if they've done it for a long time, I feel like there's a little bit, they're being a little more faithful in terms of just being obedient when they needed to versus like the career youth pastor, the guy who's called in as the minister. I think there's a little bit of a difference in terms of calling and responsibility there. But whether it be bivocational or specifically full-time, like if you're full-time, I don't see how you can be a full-time youth pastor and be putting in 35 hours a week, because that's generally what you're supposed to do as office time, and that doesn't count for any of the human side. But for me, I guess to answer that best, I think that every youth pastor needs to figure out kind of their own personal, like unique calling in terms of obviously we're doing youth ministry, but that can look different at different places. And what are you good at? When I first got into youth ministry, like I preached every couple of weeks on calling. That was like, and then like your specific gifts. And I really believe that every one of us is obviously different. And it's because there's people out there that only Jared Elrod are going to be able to reach. And there's people out there that only, student, Jane is going to be able to reach. And so I tell my students, like, you may feel like you're weird and you may think that that's a negative, but you know what? Maybe there's other weird people out there that are just your kind of weird that only you can reach. Like, I won't be able to reach because their weirdness is going to like clash with my weirdness and it's not going to work. Only you can reach them. So I feel like it's the youth pastor really understands, at least on some level, kind of, so he's not just doing mailing lists all day, or he's not just looking over the shoulder of just, oh, this is what is popular now, but he knows or she knows what they are good at. And that's what they spend their time in. So when I first got started, my very first youth ministry, my full first time, it was my home church, and I kind of worked over years my way up. Before I got in, I was the media minister. And so when I took over youth, I continued doing that. And I had the majority of the youth group in my media ministry. And I was able to do so much one-on-one discipleship, not in a formal setting, but because at the time I was lacking most youth pastor skills, but I'd been doing media ministry for years, and I knew how to work with people, one or two or three at a time. So I'd have my it was almost like a small group, except for, we had something we're doing. And then my classic example is, like I would see something, up in one of the guys' lives, or someone else would maybe a few kids. There was a couple times where like, hey, this kid, there's something going on. He's got an attitude. He's being really rude. He's putting us down. So I'd be like, hey man, call your mom, let her know, like, I'll give you a ride home. And they knew what that meant. That meant that we were going to have a talk. And so, we drove home. And so I did all this out of what I knew, which was how to run the media ministry. Because as far as like setting events and like, it was a miracle my first year that I even got us to youth convention, and that was half planned by the last youth pastor. So I worked on my strengths. I mean, we did an outreach where the main focus was a short film that we made, and then the band, because there's already a band established, did worship, and they did a little drama. So I worked on my strengths, and now over the years, those have grown and those have increased and been blessed. But that was kind of what I did. So I feel like, you need to not just do what is necessarily normally expected. You need to kind of figure out who you are and also figure out your environment. And I spent one youth ministry position doing all skate stuff, which was not at all my gifting, not at all. But I just got to put
now skate stuff. We're talking about skateboarders, is that right?
Skateboarders, yeah. And I'm not a skateboarder. My intern was not a skateboarder. But we set up those ramps every single week, and we grew that youth ministry, and we were there for those kids, and we were loving on those kids. And by that time, my skills had grown, and so I was a little bit better. I was still shaky in a lot of areas, but I had gotten pretty good at, meeting a couple kids and just kind of working with them and making connections. And so that's what we did. Just, 1-2 kids at a time. The youth ministry took off because of, we found a need. So those are like two key things, I think, is finding out like your specific kind of calling, what it is that you're good at and your gifts, and then really focusing on that. And then that's how you kind of decide what else, like what can be farmed out to volunteers. It's like, well, what are you good at and what are you horrible at? That kind of thing. And then also find what are the needs of your students, of your community. And those are, to me, how like I figure out how to put my time in. And then I look across the board and go, okay, here's the things that I can do in 2 hours what it would take someone else, 6 hours to do, and vice versa. Here's something that I'm horrible or I don't enjoy or drains me or whatever. Let's put leaders in those positions.
Right.
And so that's kind of my take on it.
So what I'm hearing though too is if I were breaking it down here, somebody you would say that is not taking their calling seriously is not maximizing their time. Mm-hmm. They're not maximizing their time in efforts to reach more students, to be good at what they're good at, right? Or people that that are not using their time or their gifts, right? They're not using their gifts really. What God's given them to do. They're either some people think watching YouTube videos all day is an important youth ministry task. That's important. You have to find just the right video to show these days. Yeah. You got to find the most viral of viral videos, and you have to find that to make kids enjoy whatever it is you have. So, what would you say then, if you could describe? Give me the contrast here. Give me the 5 qualities of somebody who is serious about their calling. In other words, whether they're bivocational, whether they're a volunteer, or a Bible volunteer or a full-time youth worker, some of the things you mentioned were finding out what you're good at, right? Mm-hmm. Using your time wisely, doing more hands-on with kids versus sitting in an office. What would you say maybe 2 other qualities maybe of a person you would describe as somebody who takes their calling seriously in the ministry?
Okay, I know exactly what they are. The other one's going to be someone who's willing to be a learner and constantly be reinventing themselves, to always be ready for whatever challenges or whatever it is. So they're not going to sit back and go, this is the way we do things. They're going to always be learning. They're going to be open, and they're going to put in that extra time, whether it's conferences, books, podcasts, any of that kind of stuff, to figure things out and really be able to be the best version of themselves
right
at the time.
So definitely investment. So being invested. So really investing in yourself and getting better. That if you're not getting better at what you do, if you're just hanging on by your fingernails, you got to have some time for learning. You got to find, whether that's, like you said, whether that's through podcasts or YouTube videos. We know a couple of guys with YouTube channels, right, that focus on youth ministry. I think you have one. I think I have one. And those will be in the show notes, by the way. So if you need to find out all about our YouTube channels and training and learning all that stuff. But give me another quality there.
Yeah. So the last one, and this one is like, if you're thinking like, oh, this sounds like a lot, that's not kind of how I think of youth ministry. It comes down to what I think is the most important reason. And it's just because you have, a heart, a burden, whatever you want to say, for students. And that's really what it comes down to. And I personally believe that's why I was out of youth ministry for a while, because I was lacking that in the beginning. And that's why I was okay sitting in the office. That's why some of the harder or more personal or awkward, tasks were hard for me. And I resented, a senior pastor telling me to go to something on a Friday night when I was supposed to be like my day off, or, that type of thing. Yeah. Versus when I came back, God had changed my heart, and I really had a passion for it, to the point where it was like, okay, I could sit here and play Clash of Clans, or I can get up and I can message, for students, and then see, and then a conversation strikes out, and then I can spend the next couple hours talking with a student who's hurting. And that was what really changed for me. And that, I think, is what makes all the things I mentioned, makes all the hours I work, apparently, extreme hours, worth it and not as hard. And to me, a lot of those hours, like, I argue that I don't even consider all of them working, because I feel like, a good percentage of my hours worked are things that build back into me, or whatever. That's a whole nother conversation or a whole nother point. But it's that heart where you're not counting the time, you're not counting the hours. You're saying, like, I want to reach these kids, and if it takes me deleting all the games off my phone, so that way every time I sit down to play a cell phone game and there's none there, that reminds me to go message a couple students, whatever your version of that is. I mean, it doesn't have to be like, I've chosen to get rid of a lot of those kind of things that suck my time out. I don't know what it looks like for you, but that heart that makes all the other things I mentioned not seem like, oh, this isn't what I signed up for. It makes it seem like, hey, whatever it takes, we gotta get in there and win these kids.
Absolutely. And for me, I have done my best I don't spend a lot of time in the office, just because I just don't. Not because, I do a a reasonable amount. I figure out what my office time is, but I work best on fly. I mean, this little gadget right here keeps me connected all the time, right? Because you like I said, you used to have to like use your like office phone to call
Yeah.
parents or people. But man, I can send posts, I can do videos, I can just, whatever I'm doing or wherever I'm going or whatever I have going on. Shopping. Another too, something, and I want to make sure that our listeners and watchers, those who are watching and those who are listening on the podcast, know this: no matter whether you're bivocational, a volunteer, or full time, like Jared said, this is not a guilt trip. We're not trying to guilt people out or make people feel bad if they're not doing enough time. There's plenty of people that are watching the clock, right? There's plenty of people who will be happy to tell you that you're not doing enough for the kingdom's sake. And so for that reason, like you said, I think you have to be able to know who you are, know what your family responsibilities are and all those things. But because of technology, because of things like that, using technology and using those things to stay connected with kids. You know what? I also believe in a side of the same coin is a ministry of presence and a ministry of absence. In other words, I know when to be present in a kid's life. And I know when there's times when they don't need to hear from me. Too much of me is a bad thing, right? I don't need to be all up in their business all the time. If I'm going to do that, I might as well be their parent. I mean, that's going to be, if I'm always checking on them, I'm always doing that. So there has to be, for me, the balance for me is ministry of presence that make the time count, that when I'm with them, I am fully engaged with them. They will not forget the moment that I am with them because they know I'm with them. So whether that's taking a kid with me to the hospital visit, whether that's taking a kid shopping with me to go buy supplies for youth games or whatever it is, we can all find a way to maximize those little moments and times to spend time with kids. But then there's the other side of the coin where it's ministry of absence that says, you know what, maybe I need to stay out of this situation. Sometimes you can get roped into some drama that maybe you don't want to be involved in, that families need to work out for themselves. And sometimes a youth pastor can complicate it. I speak from experience on this issue, by the way. I just need to point that out, that I have stepped into hornet's nest thinking that I was helping the situation, when in reality, I was not. I was aggravating it because either the parents it was either none of my business, and the families did not want me to know stuff about what was going on in their family. Yeah. They did not want me to know things. Or they were somewhat jealous in the fact that they felt like I was taking their kid's side, or I was, doing stuff like that, it wasn't true. I mean, I wasn't trying to do that, but it's a perceived, it's a perceived thing amongst family that I am an interloper of some kind. So I think in keeping that, keeping your ministry of presence, when you're present, be present. Be at that game, be at that band thing, be at that football game, be at those things. But and then the other part is know when you're not supposed to be there, right? Let parents be parents. You do youth work when kids call upon you and when you interact with them. And I think it matters too to single youth pastors versus married youth pastors, or married youth pastors with kids, or married youth pastors with no kids, and everybody has their different dynamic with that. So, but these are all great points, Jared. I think it's an excellent point to be made. Because even the Apostle Paul talked about the fact is, look, if you don't work, you don't eat. He discouraged laziness. He discouraged people from sitting around idle hands, right? And talking about some of the women of the scriptures, talking about being idleness and things like that. And the fact that we tend to maybe focus, we don't spend our time very wisely. We're just like gabbing women at the gate, talking about whatever, versus mentoring, versus, training the older and the younger, the older training the younger kids and things like that. So there's always ways we can connect with kids if we just have the time to do that, right? If we make the time, right? It's not have the time, it's make the time. So any other thoughts, buddy? I don't want to cut the subject short, but if you were to give any other recommendations, if you would, if somebody's thinking about their calling and whether or not they're taking it serious or not, what would you ask somebody to check? What would be the gut check or the or the things to look for if maybe they're not taking it too seriously? What is some? Once again, we're not judging people. We're simply trying to set up a format, if we can, to say, how do we check? The scripture says what? Examine yourself to see if you're still in the faith, right? That's about belief. But maybe there's times too that you have to examine yourself to see if you're still passionate and you're still in the calling, if you're still in what you're supposed to be doing. Because some people go through that, whether or not they should even be doing what they're doing right now, and they struggle with that. So what would you say to those? What would be the check down list, if you will, that if somebody was to examine themselves and to see whether or not they're either still passionate or they're still taking what they do as a serious thing, as a serious part of what God's asked them to do?
Yeah, for sure. For me, I would say, where does your mind go when you have some free time? Does it go to students? Does it go to ministry? Does it go to, oh, I'm tired, I need to spend some time with the Lord? Does it go to, and I'm not saying you have to be perfect in every single time, and there are some times where you just need to veg out. But overall, like, where does your mind go when you're tired, when you're upset, when you're bored? Are you reaching for your phone to play games, to watch those videos, to just kind of kill some time and veg out because or are you thinking like, you know what? Hey, I'm at the DMV and I've got some time. It's been really busy. Let me get caught up on my Bible reading, or let me get caught up on messaging with students, or whatever it is. Just like, where does your mind go? Like, is it something that when you're physically doing youth ministry, you're there, but anytime you're out, your mind is on other things? And it's not something that you ever think about, because if it's a passion, if it's something it's obviously going to consume, you're thinking about it a lot.
Right.
So that is my number one check, is when I have to watch and say, okay, when's my mind starting to stray off and it's on other things, whether it be on bills or problems or, poor me because of look at all the stuff that this or that, or I'm underappreciated. And for me, the answer to that, I'm a firm believer in recognizing the problem and then taking it to the Lord. Like, I remember being in high school and being like, God, I hate the Old Testament. It's like, I know logically, like, there's cool stuff in there. I remember around the time of Lord of the Rings, I was praying, I was like, I know there's stuff in here, God, that's like way cooler than like Helm's Deep or any of the Lord of the Rings stuff, but I hate it. Like, can you make this more interesting? Like, I'm going to read it. I'm going to be faithful to read it, but can you like show up and make it more interesting? And now I love the Old Testament. So I believe it can be the same way, where you can come and it's almost like that whole, I believe, help my unbelief. It's like, God, I'm not that into youth ministry right now. Like, I don't feel like it's time to move on. It's not me being called into senior pastor or anything like that. It's just, for whatever reason, God, I am going to not show up and do the motions, but for that would be like, Lord, I'm going to dedicate an extra 30 minutes, 45 minutes, hour, whatever it is. I'm going to give up one of my shows, whatever it is, to spend time in prayer and studying, not for a message, but just to study. And will you honor that by showing up and making me more passionate for you and for the calling you've placed on me? Because I'm noticing my mind's going to all these other places and my heart isn't really in it. Because like your mind's going to go to where your heart actually is, right? And that's you're going to be pondering on the things of like what you're actually caring about. So to me, that's my best check. And when I start getting grumpy, I start anything, just my mind's on dumb stuff or not on on the kind of things I'm normally passionate about. I know, like, okay, it's time. I'm a little empty. I need to go spend some time in prayer. I need to go read some word. And not studying, but just go read some word and just see where it takes me, type thing. So yeah, that's I hope I answered the question. I kind of forgot.
I think you did. I think you did. I think like I said, we get distracted and we get into personal pursuits, pursuit of money, the pursuit of other things that don't add value to the bottom line, right? And, for me, like we got rid of our movie channel. So my night times are not filled with me staying up late watching movies and stuff like that. So, we can always trim back on some things. I don't have any games on my phone. I don't have any, because number one, I figured out early on that my kids wanted to always borrow my phone. I had games on them, so I made sure I didn't have any games on them. Otherwise, that's been a nice side benefit. That's right. Not only my personal kids, but like my youth ministry kids would like want to borrow my phone and play games or would do whatever. So now that all these children have their own phones, they can do what they want to do. So, but anyway, Jared, I think that's good, man. I think we'll wrap the meat section of this
Awesome.
up here because it fits in between the slices of bread, right,
Right.
that we have here. And so I want to move into a segment called Nerding Out. And I want to know some of the things that you are nerding out about. And by the way, this is a complete side note. When you talk about Lord of the Rings and stuff, did you see the latest movie Risen?
No, I haven't.
Okay. There's a scene there that reminds me of when the dwarves are running through the woods or something, and it has like all these disciples running. And it just kind of the picture reminded me, they're like running through like a cavern or something. And I'm going, wait a second. Maybe they're borrowing from that. I don't know what they were doing. They were trying to make a Lord of the Rings kind of thing out of it. I don't know. But it was a decent movie. But besides that, but I did nerd out about that just because the movie comes from a different perspective. And I like it because it's told from the viewpoint of the guard, of one of the Roman guards that was there when Christ died, and so he's on a journey to find the missing body, and so that's kind of a cool element there. But what are some of the things that you're nerding out about? Maybe it's an app, maybe it's movies, maybe it's music, maybe it's some sort of tech. What's going on in your world that you seem to be somewhat fascinated with at the moment?
I'll give a more spiritual and a less spiritual answer.
You are super spiritual, Jared. I would expect any less than a spiritual answer. So all our listeners are super spiritual too, by the way. They're all nodding their heads like, oh yes, give me the spiritual, Paul. Give it to me.
So on that side, I'm really interested in kind of like the bookends of two different perspectives of kind of some stuff I'm on a journey searching. So I've already mentioned like, I've gone back 100 years, and I'm reading and listening to a lot of books from just long buried and dead ministers. So it started with Moody, and then now I'm reading a book, and I'm actually reading on my phone because I normally listen to Audible, and so I dug this one up on George Mueller, who is someone who inspired Moody, and he's all about faith, and he did this entire ministry without asking men for anything. Just God provided all the needs, doing an orphanage, and that's like crazy to me, especially coming from a marketer background where everything's about asking and, making that ask and whatnot. So those kind of things, I'm going back 100 years of like these great, godly men, but then I'm also then taking like, kind of comparing that to see their work ethic and their philosophy on ministry and how they ran their daily lives and their kind of personal philosophy, comparing that with some of the top marketers right now who most growing in influence, like Gary Vee being the number one, and just seeing how he's growing in influence. I'm fascinated by the concept of non-Christian marketers who are finding success in their business off of biblical principles, not because they read the Bible, but because they tried everything else until they hit a biblical principle and go,
correct,
oh, this works.
Yes.
And that's fascinating to me. And then that makes me wonder, like these guys are stumbling in darkness upon these biblical principles.
Right.
And then we have the manual, and a lot of times we take it for granted. So I'm kind of bookended with that between, the podcast, the book, the Daily V actually has really been a lot because I'm seeing his daily life and then comparing that to these guys from 100 years ago. Where's that balance? Where do I fall in? Where does God want me to be? And so that's one thing I've been for a couple of weeks kind of nerding out on. And then the other one is the less spiritual.
Yes.
So I have
all our listeners just went, oh yes, the non-spiritual stuff. Give it to me, Paul. Give it to me.
I have been for the last few months, since about November, I really cut out basically everything that I watched. For a long time, since at least a year, if not a year and a half, I haven't had any games on my phone. I was playing too many games and wasting too much time, so I got rid of those a while back. But since about November, I went through and I cut out almost every single show. So the only quote unquote TV watching I did was when at night my wife would be watching one of her shows that I'd kind of be watching it with her, but I also have my laptop. So it was I'm following the story and we can discuss it and talk about it, but I'm also trying to redeem that time by having my laptop out. And I made the decision to bring a show in, and I'm watching. I only saw the first season of, and I loved it. Is Arrow? The Green Arrow. And so my wife wanted to watch it with me. And there's 3 seasons that are dropped on Netflix now. And I remember being so pumped up by the show, it was so motivating for me. So I'd watch an episode. It kind of had the same effect now when I watch some Gary Vee stuff. I'd watch an episode and then I'd be okay, now I want to go do something. And at the time it was a business, so I I'd have to go out and work. So I'd watch 1 or 2 episodes and I'd go work forever. So I was like, I want to get back into that. I remember it was really motivating. I haven't been watching anything for a long time. And so like, it's as good as I remember. And I can't wait to get to season 2 and 3 of the stuff that I haven't seen yet. And I'm loving it.
Well, that is awesome. I once again, I tried to watch. I mean, I watched like season 1 of Arrow. I don't think I've gotten through season 2 entirely yet. But you know what? I'll be honest with you. I'd really like to watch. I'd love to watch things like The Flash and Arrow. And I was really addicted to The Blacklist for a long time. Then the show with Jim Caviezel where he is like a mercenary. Golly, I can't remember what that's called. It's all about the computer age and how the computer sees you everywhere. And I wish I could remember that. I can't remember. But anyway, all these different shows. And I'll be honest with you, I don't think I'm not missing them like I used to miss them. Like I used to like DVR everything and fill up the whole thing. And then I'd wind up like not watching them. But for now, I keep it to a few things. Like I just finished binging Daredevil season 2, which has a lot of great faith moments in it. It has a lot of great iconic type because Matt's faith is involved there with his decisions and things like that, and how he looks at things morally plays a big part.
He's got a strong Catholic background from what I remember about the comics.
He does. Yes, he does. And that plays a part. In fact, you see him praying. You see him praying for people. Like he's there and he's praying and talking with his priest and things like that. So I nerd out about that stuff, trying to find, how religion is portrayed and how it comes out naturally, at least in this, comes out very naturally.
It's funny you said that. I actually at one point had a show. It's still on YouTube called Geek Church. And it was me and my intern at the time where we would like go read a comic book and find like an issue. And like the whole example I came up with when I pitched it to him was like, how like Scott was married and then like Jean died and then he was like married to Emma, whatever, the Snow Queen
Emma
or whatever.
Frost.
Emma Frost, there we go. And then and then his wife came back and like the moral dilemma that caused him. Like, what if we like put a biblical perspective to these things, or or like Wolverine is like feeling justified in murder, And so like we actually had a show where we did for over a year where we would like read a comic book and we would just nerd out in like that and like the spiritual side of it and everything. And
that is a great idea. So I need to search that up in YouTube, Geek Church. And watch that. I think, but that's a great idea. I mean, people do that. I mean, it's so popular now to do guys who do The Walking Dead, or they do show episodes and they do recaps and they do all those things. So you were way ahead of the curve as far as that goes. You were doing that kind of stuff but just in comic book world.
Mm-hmm. And now there's so many shows that like if we were still doing it, it'd be so much easier now because we could just watch the latest episode. We didn't have money because I was a youth pastor and he was an intern, so we drive down to the bookstore and we pretty much did exclusively trade paperbacks because we didn't have the money to buy the actual comics. So we go down and we binge read like for hours and we take notes and then we come back and record episodes.
That is outstanding. Like today would be so much easier because you could like find like you would show like the cartoon, you'd show the comic clip like while you're talking, right? You would just kind of show the frame or the box or the whatever where that's going on. So I think that's just cool stuff, man. I think stuff like that is just people could, youth pastors. That's another way to use your time effectively, right? Is getting kids involved in your technology and talking about things they like. And talking about things like that and being able to use your time with them. I think that is very, very cool. Let's see. I think we're going to move into the last segment here, Jared. I think we're going to go into our time of motivation. I think we've tried to help youth pastors move their ministry forward. Hopefully they've taken this to heart and none of them, I'm not going to get terrible emails or anything like that. We're not judging anybody. We're simply trying to help people up their game. We're trying to examine our hearts to say, look, we're taking this generation is worth our time, our effort, our all the gifts that we have, right? That not waste time, right? Redeem the time for the days are evil, Scripture says, right? To buy that time back, to use it for purpose. And now we talk directly to them. Let's build them up a little bit. What would you like to say to youth workers, both watching and listening, that will just give them some motivation. Some of them are discouraged. Some of them are beating themselves up because they feel like they don't put enough time in or can't put enough time in, and really just leave them with a good word as far as what they can reflect upon and take away from this that would encourage their hearts.
For sure. What I would say is what you do matters. I know a lot of times it can seem like not. A lot of the little things, all your time that you're putting in to students and everything matters. Even if it's just that annoying 45 minutes with that one student as they're waiting for their parent to pick them up way late after a service or an event. All those little things that aren't really in the job description, but somehow we end up having to do and can be discouraging. When you wanted to get home by a certain time and you had to, that extra stuff, the time we spend texting, and then this student stops, coming to our youth ministry after you spend hours of up multiple nights, counseling and encouraging them. It all matters, and it's not stuff that just disappears. Like, we may not see it until the other side of heaven, but it's all being invested into their lives. It's all stuff that I love to think of the concept of, like, it's almost as if like, I don't want to say tools, but almost like tools for like the Holy Spirit. Like, we're putting this stuff in there, and then for us, it may seem like it stops and it just terminates there. And it's like, well, I'm never gonna get that time back. That student's gone. This happened. What had happened. But the Holy Spirit is that stuff invested in them that the Holy Spirit can pull on and draw on for the rest of their lives until he draws them back into his perfect plan for them. So don't be discouraged in doing good, even if it's little small good that's unplanned things that seem insignificant.
That's right. Well, that's a good word, Jared, because like the scripture says, like you said, do not be weary in well doing, for in due season you will reap a harvest. And we're all seed sowers. We're all people of the flesh. We're all people in the natural, right, with supernatural power. And there are days that guys are discouraged. And so that's a good word to remember, is that every good that we do for a student today is a seed that is sown that will eventually come back, even in its due season, its due time, even beyond our ministry, that we may never see. We may get a phone call 10 years from now from a student about something we did or something we said that maybe made an impact upon their life. So, well, Jared, thanks for joining me today for the podcast today and for the Blab session. What would if people want to reach you, if they want to find you out there in the World Wide Web, where could they find you? How can they get in touch with you?
Best place would be kind of home base, youthfactor.us. They can email me. It's just Jared, Jared, in Elrod, ELROD @gmail.com. That's my email. That'll go right to my phone, so I'll see that. And of course, you can follow me on Twitter, Facebook. You can search me and all that kind of stuff. So
and tell them about your
the
YouTube
website,
and tell them about your YouTube channel too, because that's all on your YouTube. I mean, all the YouTube stuff's on your channel anyway.
Yeah, you can find my YouTube either through going to the website and then clicking on one, or just going to YouTube and searching Youth Factor TV. I have a show where I kind of get up and I'll have topics I feel are on my heart, and then after they've kind of percolated long enough in my notebook and I feel like I'm ready, I'll go and record an episode where I get up and just, sometimes it's more of a rant, sometimes it's encouraging, sometimes it's more tactical. And I record it and I put it together in little, 10, 15 minute, every now and then 20-minute episodes. And then I put them out there, and hopefully they're encouraging and inspiring. Some of them have been more tactical, like about using Snapchat and stuff like that, but a lot of them have been more, it's completely different, to be honest. God's totally turned it. When I was reluctant to get into it, because I'm like, there's so many guys out there with more experience, and I felt like God wanted me to do it. And I was like, okay, well, if I'm going to do it, and I was going to get out there and I was going to pull on my marketing experience, and I was going to be like, how to use like Facebook dark posts to get your students, or students from high school about your youth ministry. And like, I did that Snapchat one, and that was about it with that. And then just God keeps putting these things in my heart, and they're not technical. They're not like how to do Facebook, how to do Instagram, marketing tips or anything like that. It's all been kind of like encouragement, build up, kind of, light a fire type stuff. And so I'm like so nervous every time I put one out, because it's like, like almost like I feel like almost evangelistic when it's like, oh, I'm gonna go in, but then it's like, oh, but now it's on the internet. So now I have, okay. So I'm always nervous when I like, it's all ready, it's all put together, and I have like, okay, I'm gonna go out there and share it. well, I hope this one goes well. So every single week I do it, I'm all nervous, and then I've mostly not gotten any negative feedback. I
Right.
had one article I got razzed a bit, but it's been really good, and it's just kind of fun to watch God be like, okay, well, you can think it's going to be this just to get you started, and then okay, left turn, this is what you're actually going to do now.
That's right. Sometimes the things we're doing are not the things we're doing. We're practicing. Whatever it is, sometimes the things we're doing are practice for something else, right?
Yeah.
So,
Right.
but like example, your latest episode is lock-ins don't suck, you do. I don't know why anybody would be offended by that, but lock-ins don't suck, you do. You right there. You're a
My
terrible person.
My titles come to me. It definitely stems from my marketing background.
Yeah. Well, hey, you know what? And I'll just share an example. And I know our podcast listeners probably don't care about this, but just from that perspective, is I did something about Andy Stanley, and his whole thing that he did about big church versus small church. And boy, it's amazing how many people want to hear about Andy Stanley. I think that video is like close to like 800 views in like 3 weeks. It's like. It's true. We like terrible news, and we like to watch people crumble somehow. We like to watch things fall apart. So, but
I was just to say my favorite part is because the way I set up my headlines generally are to kind of like pique interest, and then I'll go in and I'll kind of answer it. For a lot of times, it almost seems like my headline and my message are kind of take opposite stances.
Right.
So I'll go in there, and my favorite thing is when people don't watch the video. And then want to try to call me out on something. And I'm like, yeah, that's pretty much what the video says, and then they're like, oh, sorry, I didn't watch the video. I just assumed that you were going to say this off of, whatever.
Watch the video. Don't judge. Don't jump to conclusions, people. Well, Jared, thank you so much for joining me for the Youth Ministry in Motion podcast. I hope that everybody that's listening will get in touch with you. They will check out your website. And they will check out your YouTube channel, and they'll hit you on Twitter and all those good things. And all that stuff will be in the show notes, by the way. And so for those that are listening, by the way, don't forget to sign up for the Fresh Impact newsletter at thediscipleproject.net. And you can click there, start making an impact today, and you'll get the show notes. You'll get all kinds of extra goodies and all that kind of good stuff. So you guys, I will talk to you guys next time on the Youth Ministry in Motion podcast, where you can get motivated and keep your youth ministry moving forward. So until next time, we will see you then. Have a good week, everybody.
Bye.
Bye.